who in most instances would be either elected official, a member of the civil service, etc. So it would be public sector employees and their family members.
Okay. And you say that because definition of public official includes a public sector employee. Is that why you say so?
That's correct.
Okay.
Just to close off on the disclosure or the disclosure form issue, in paragraph 25 at page 22, you describe the knock-on effects of the weaknesses of the disclosure form. It's an issue you've already addressed, but if you can just read what you've said in paragraph 25, because it is a foundational issue, the form.
Sure. So let me read it verbatim so we can get this correctly. So paragraph 25 says, collectively, these gaps extend beyond the disclosure form itself, hampering the efficacy of the whole integrity system that depends on it. Declarant can comply fully and honestly with every requirement of the current form while still holding substantial undisclosed wealth through a family member, exercising undisclosed control through a company, through a nominee arrangement, or accumulating assets whose origin and timing cannot be tested against legitimate income. The next paragraph says, as conflict of interest management and lifestyle review processes rely on the information the form generates, these design flaws are not confined to the form itself. Without amendments to the disclosure form, the impact of the integrity management framework is limited regardless of how well downstream processes are administered.
Before you move off that, speaking to the earlier discussion with Mr. Chaskalson about striking a balance between getting a form or a disclosure mechanism that gives you meaningful and useful information and balancing that with not overly burdening the requirement on the declarant because of the problems that you've picked up if it is overly burdensome. Are you able to refer or have you considered what you would say are best practice jurisdictions, where you say these seem to have struck the right balance that we can reference?
I think it's an excellent question. And so the package that we've shared, this goes into a lot of those questions of looking at good international practice, the graphs we've just shown on what the kind of standard approaches to specific issues. So a lot of those would be considered in these additional documents to understand exactly what good practice is internationally. But I think an important point to emphasize is that it always has to be context specific and driven by the issues that a country faces. So the first graph that we looked at on the question of family members, we saw, for example, that in high income countries, they don't have this kind of disclosure requirement. And that might be the case because the level of corruption and the kinds of challenges that they deal with don't necessarily warrant that kind of level of disclosure and invasion of privacy. And so these issues should always be tailored to your specific context, to your specific challenges, the scale of the corruption issue that you have in a country. One of the documents that we've included in the package, it's titled, let me confirm that for you so I get it right. It's number 8. It is the start argument. It's titled Asset and Interest Disclosure, a Technical Guide to an Effective Form. And this, I think, it sets out a really good explanation of the best practice guidance on what a form could look like, on the specific variables to consider, the types of information that one should think about. It is a very maximalist approach. So this particular form and the explanation accompanying it will include every type of imaginable type of asset that somebody might declare. There's even mention of things like intellectual property rights, which might be relevant in some jurisdiction. So it is very, very expansive, this example, but you'd have to tailor something like that to the South African context to determine this doesn't make sense. We don't necessarily have to worry about that. But I think that there are some universal principles that I think make sense in every jurisdiction. And I think questions around beneficial ownership, the family member question, I think are particularly important and I think are very relevant to the South African context. Thank you.
Can I also just ask you to speak specifically to the STAR document that looks at financial disclosure in South Africa, which is a document that possibly, I mean, a lot of it highlights the problems of our form, but it is looking at a form in the context of our specific country. It's published a couple of months ago, May 2026, and it's at page 311.
So this document titled Financial Disclosure Form and E-Disclosure System of South Africa, this was an assessment conducted at the request of the Department of Public Service and Administration to both look at the form as well as the e-disclosure system and how it functions currently. So effectively what we've done in this report is the earlier document I mentioned around designing an effective form to apply similar principles to the South African context to assess the current form against these international standards and good practice to determine what are some of the omissions in the South African context currently that should be considered and some of the priorities. So what I've done in the base document, the main notes, is to really identify the most important issues that frame the overall context and challenges. But the second document on page 311, this gets into a lot more of the technical nitty-gritty according to each disclosure category to say these are the 2-3 additional pieces of information that one should ask about, for example, your property, your vehicle, etc., to have a more full form. And so this is, I think, when one considers, recommendations for reform or what this could look like in future, I think there's a lot of kind of more in-depth technical guidelines that we've prepared to share our recommendations tailored to the South African context.
If we move off the form...
We should... sorry to interrupt. We should not forget that Dr. Skuman was to read the whole of 25, and I assumed even the sub-paragraphs. But please continue with your point, Mr. Chaskalson.
No, we have actually reached the end of 25. Yes.
Must have been asleep. Apologies.
But to move off the form itself and then to the institutional and operational framework, assuming you get the form right, you still need an institutional framework that will respond to the information in the form. And this is the issue that you address from page 23. And maybe if you can...
Let me ask a question that I think goes to weaknesses and which I think is relevant to what you have dealt with already. Some officials can be quite astute in hiding their wealth and can fill in their disclosure forms in such a manner that no suspicion is raised. In such a case, and absent blanket lifestyle audits, what would trigger a review that may culminate in a lifestyle audit? I'm asking this because it is crucial that such officials should not fall through the cracks.
It's a very good point. So in the South African context, but also in international experience, one of the issues that can trigger a more substantive investigation, such as a lifestyle audit, is, for example, a whistleblower complaint or, say, an intradepartmental complaint that they suspect that there is maybe something suspicious happening with an individual that might warrant a more substantive investigation. But this is also a core part of the verification process and why verification is so important. An official may lie on their disclosure form, and we would want to detect that. And part of the reason why I focused so much on the e-disclosure system and the question of integrations with existing databases is around how we can effectively measure the disclosures against the truth and verify that it is accurate and what they state there is correct. So in that verification process, if there are either discrepancies that come out that might warrant investigation, but beyond that, good practice is to also consider additional investigations or complaints that may arise, or you might, in a case where you verify disclosure and it's entirely correct, but there are some red flags that raise suspicions, and it might be a case of somebody having a very large financial means that you might question why is that? The form is entirely correct, but why is this person able to afford so much? Maybe that is something that then warrants further investigation. And so you can use a...
To be continued. Stay connected and stay informed with latest update.